Man, I just want to take a second here and, thank you for those kind words, Pastor. But first off, I want to thank God for saving me and allowing me to do what I'm able to do tonight, allowing what I'm able to do for someone here. Because when Pastor called me, well, first Jake called me, I'll kind of back up. Jake called me and I missed the phone call. I was like, I'll call him back. Don't worry about it. And then Pastor calls me and I was like, I could better answer that one. Something's going on. As if you've been around this church long enough, if those two people call you, you better answer the phone. And if you don't, then you're in the right spot, because I'm going to talk about pride, because I know a lot of the time before I found God in my life and before I was able to answer that phone, pride stopped me. Pride said, you don't have to answer that. It's fine. They'll figure it out. He's a man of God. He's got everything figured out. Why does he need to talk to you? So stick around, and hopefully you'll hear something. So I appreciate you guys having me talk about this. And it was funny. I sat there and I told Pastor, I said, well, fortunately, I kind of know something about this, but unfortunately, I know a lot about this, which means that, I've suffered for 16 plus years with addiction that I call alcoholism. I refer to myself as Anthony. I'm an alcoholic. When I go to a recovery program, that I also attend. And 16 and a half years, pride got in the way of me being sober. Pride stopped me from asking for help. Pride stopped me from connecting to God. Pride led me to thinking I was God. So I told Pastor, I said, man, you called the right guy to talk to these people. and then I start thinking, and I'm like, oh man, I don't even know what pride means. So what's the first thing I do? Amen. The internet, right? I Google it and I go, what does pride mean? It's a feeling of deep pleasure or satisfaction derived from one's own achievements, the achievements of those with whom one is closely associated, or from qualities or possessions that are widely admired. It doesn't sound so bad. What's so bad about pride? I'm proud of my country. I'm proud of this church. I'm proud of God, right? But then I got to thinking, and I'm like, well, the Bible says it's okay to have anger as long as I don't use it with sin, right? But unfortunately, me being the alcoholic that I am, me being the addict I am, I'm not good at using things correctly. I'm not good at being proud and not overdoing it. I'm not good at being angry and being loving, right? So, and then I'm like, okay, I don't really like that definition, because, it hurts me. It hurts my pride. It hurts my ego inside. So you know what? I'm going to go to the Bible, because the Bible says, the Bible is where love is, where God is, and everything's good, right? So then I look up the definition, just Googled it and said, and it says a secular definition of pride. Pride is not just a problem with me. It's a problem for humanity. Pride's been defined as a feeling or deep pleasure or satisfaction in an achievement, an accomplishment, or in someone else or something else, but it's also been described as conceit, egotism, vanity, vainglory, all over one's own appearance or status in life, and not just something that's been accomplished. Wow, that just said the same thing. So that means the world and the Bible are, connected, right? They're both saying the same thing. So now I sit there and I'm like, oh man, God, what I don't know. This didn't help me. The definitions didn't help me. The world didn't help me. So now what do? I pray. And I'm like, hey, Pastor, on Sunday, I'm like, hey, Pastor, this is what I'm going to talk about. You kind of stole my thunder with Adam being the root of all of our, problems, and we can blame him and everything. And I felt all good and stuff. And then I'm like, you know what? I don't know jack about the Bible. I don't. I came in here, this place, 9 months ago, not understanding it, not knowing it. So what did I do all day Sunday when I got home? I start flipping through the internet. Pride, Bible, pride, Bible, pride, Bible. And I'm like, what is this? All that is doing is boosting my own ego, so that way I can look smart in front of you guys. But that's not what I'm here to do. So I'm not here to look smart. And so today I'm sitting there, I'm not feeling good. I tell my wife, I'm like, babe, like, do I got a fever? Am I anxious? Like, what's going on? And no joke, I go through that, I open up the Bible, and I'm looking, I'm like, none of these verses make sense. None of these verses make sense. So I open up my big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, we talk about this a lot in here, because this is a program of recovery, and this is what I use to help recover. So I open it up, and I read something, and I start shaking. And I'll read to you guys here in a little bit. And at that moment, God told me, Anthony, you're not here to talk about yourself. You're here to help somebody else out. You're not here to scare them. That pride is this awful thing as long as it's used correctly, right? You're not here to preach and just beat people down, because they're already beating themselves up, just like I did. I sat there for years, 16 plus years, being like, you know what? I got a problem, but it's okay, I can do it. It's okay, I don't need God. I don't need someone to tell me that I shouldn't drink. I don't need someone to tell me how to make it right? I'm a man's man. I'm going to figure it out on my own. I'm going to stand on my own 2 feet. And it's so crazy how, coming full circle, I'm standing up here in front of you guys talking to you about something that I struggled with for 16 and a half years. And it's not about me. It's not about what I know. It's about what I can do for the next alcoholic, what I can do for the next person that's suffering, what I can do to pass it on. And it was funny, and this is what I love about Pastor, because he likes confirming things for me. When God, and this is how God works through him, right? Is we'll get to it at the end, but once you have it, don't stop showing up. That is the enemy working, and straight up topic we're talking about, pride, the enemy in recovery, right? That's your own pride saying, I got this. That's your own pride saying, I don't need to be here. That's your own pride saying, I'm better than. Right? So let me share this with you, and since this is I want to parallel this very closely. So this is from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is where God spoke to me today. And this may be a little lengthy, but I think you guys will get a lot out of it, because, man, I love this Bible. I love it, but I still have to learn how to love it and how it affects me on a daily basis. And the more I read, the more I learn. And what's awesome about it is when I get confirmation from this and this, it's got to be right. It's got to be right. So this is from Bill's story. And for those people who don't know, Bill W. is one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this comes from the very front of the book. And it's ironic how it parallels the front of this book with Adam and Eve. So Bill's sitting there, and he's basically saying that, so I'll just read it. It says, my brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hypotherapy, mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind of doctor who explained that through certain selfish, just another word for pride, and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. So, long story short is Bill has been in and out of hospitals, in and out of asylums, and he finally feels that, hey, look, this is, he has the answer. It says right here, it revealed me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, that the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to battling liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer. Self-knowledge. Whew. He's already sitting there thinking that he's got this. But what do we know from the Bible? That pride is the fall of man. This dude just sat there, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and said, surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. Well, let's keep reading. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. So not only did he go back to drinking, he drank excessively, even though he's been in and out of asylums, knowing what a drink will do to him. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremors, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. So he knew he was going to die. So where do we see that in here? Adam and Eve, God told him that if you eat from the tree, you're going to die. What do we do anyway as addicts and alcoholics? We tell ourselves that we can. Why? Because we think we're better. We think we know it all. We think that it's not going to kill us. Our brain, my brain at least, is telling me it's okay. It won't happen to me. So just like the founder, so they did not tell me. I knew the utmost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who thought so well of myself and my abilities, of the capacity to surmount obstacles, was concerned at last. Now I was plunged into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots that had gone before me. So he's basically saying, hey, other people have done it, so I'm just going to be like everyone else. Well, guess what? We're different. There's hope. It says, I thought of my poor wife. Man, how many times have I been there? How many times have I sat there and been like, you know what? If I just didn't drink, like, my wife would be there for me. If I just didn't drink, like, my wife would love me. And then when I got done drinking, I would sit there and be like, man, why did I put her through that? And then we go straight to feeling, then we go straight to wanting to say sorry. It says, then there had been much happiness after all. So we justify it. I sat there and justified, being like, you know what? We had good times. It just came to an end a little early. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. So I think I'm going to stop right there for a second, and I get to that point where I sit there and say, I'm done. I want to give up. I won't do this again. I swear to every living God thing before I even knew what God was. I just prayed and did whatever I could, saying, I can't, don't let me pick up that drink. But it's so crazy how a day goes by. Man, I'm starting to feel pretty good. That remorse, shame, and guilt that we talk about kind of leaves. And what creeps in? Pride. Pride sitting there saying, you know what? Y'all go to work a couple days. I'll sit up there and show up. That way on Friday, when my boss asks what I'm doing, I can sit there and say, yeah, I'm going to go have a drink. Because my pride says I have to be like everyone else in the world. That I need another drink. It says, trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. Fierce sob sobered me for a bit, like I just described. Then came the indigenous insanity of the first drink. And on Armistead Day, 1934, it was off again. So even after this guy was so remorseful, so sorry, knew that he wasn't probably going to see his loving wife, basically said, I don't care if I live or die. He goes and drinks again. Now, if that's not insanity and you can't relate to that, God bless you. But I know me being the alcoholic, my pride sits there and says, I can't relate. I'm better than that. I never went to a hospital. I never went to asylum. But guess what? I drug my wife through the trenches. I drug my kid through the trenches. But it's okay. He was only 2. He won't remember. He won't remember. Guess who does, though? This alcoholic. So pride says, you know what? Let's drink one more time. So he goes out. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. It says, never the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected, there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work. Oh, amen. I used to love when my wife was out of town. Whew! That was a time for it to get on. You know, I didn't have to go anywhere. I only had to worry about the glass I was drinking out of to clean. Man, I really like this guy now. Him and I are speaking the same language. And, oh man, I'll just leave it at that before I get in trouble. It says, my wife at work, I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. So what that says to me is, man, Anthony, did you ever hide alcohol? Would I tell you guys that if I did? My pride would say no. But part of my program is being rigorously honest. I used to hide alcohol, and I never thought I did. I used to put it under the bed. I used to put it, oh, man, my favorite spot was underneath the bathroom, because it was like every time I was taking a pee, it would be like, let's take a shot. Let's go. And it's just more I can sit here and relate to this guy. And this is where God steps in. And I think this is where, in my opinion, that Bill sees his first glimpse of God, even though he won't admit it till later. It says, by musing was interrupted by telephone. So you got to think, in 1934, how many telephones are there? What is the chance that this guy, a drunk, is at home, which I know because I'm the type of drunk when I'm drinking, I'm not going to answer the phone. I don't want anyone to know. I'm not going to let people see me like that. My pride is too much for that. I'm going to sit there and wait till the next day to call that person back to find out what was even happening. So you got to think, this is where God steps into Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time. It says, the cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcohol insanity. So this guy, Bill, already has an opinion about his old friend. He already says, sweet. I have someone to drink with. Someone to write the check with me. Someone to go to the bank and help me cash it. Now I have a team behind me saying that it's okay, that my pride that is so run rampant is actually correct. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would never have dinner, or of course, we would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him, unmindful of his welfare. I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. Man, that's exactly how I was. I'd be sitting there being like, if I can only drink like that time in Vegas, or if I can only drink like that time at the reunion, or if I can only drink, then I'd be normal. My pride totally forgetting about the times where I didn't show up for my wife, the times I didn't show up for my kid, the times I drove drunk with my kid in the car. Right? My pride totally squashing that and being like, you know what, maybe I can drink like a normal person. There was that time we had chattered in airplane to complete a gag. So he's already reminiscing. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. Man, I used to really not like when someone would show up at my house all cheery, being like, hey, Anthony, what do you want to do today? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? I'm like, dude, I got a hangover. Just please be quiet and get me some more Advil. So I can only imagine that Bill is now sitting there being like, wow. Well, let's see what he does. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what he had what had gotten to that fellow. He wasn't himself. Man, does it feel good to be different. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smiling. He said, I've got religion. Oh, that's all it takes? That's all it takes? I was aghast. So was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I am suspected, a little cracked about religion. Let me just share a little bit about myself. If someone would have told me a year ago that I'd be standing here praising God, worshiping, surrendering my pride, surrendering my ego to God, I would have done the exact same thing. I would have done what Bill did and said, you know what? I'm glad God's for you. I'm glad you're all shiny and everything. Now, can you give me that Advil and please leave? But this is how I know God was there after that phone call. He goes, he had this starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. So this guy is sitting there just being like, thank God I got enough for a day and a half. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of simple religious ideas and practical programs of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. So this guy, 2 months of giving his life over to God. And he's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Man, my pride used to really not like people like that. Now I surround myself with people like that. It goes on, and it says, he had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. So let me tell someone in this room that's still struggling, someone that thinks that a life of recovery isn't for them, someone that is still struggling with this God aspect, with this religion aspect, right? We are here for you. We love you to death. But it says right here, if I cared to have it. So that means I got to do some work. That means I got to take the first step through those doors. That means I got to take the first step by standing up. That means I got to take the first step by raising my hands. That means I got to take the first step down this aisle to this altar. And I got to take the first step in talking to God. I can't talk to God for you. Pastor can't talk to God for you. Jake can't talk to God for you. You have to talk to God. You have to take that first step. But there's hope and there's promise in that first step. It says, I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. So it takes me getting to some point of hopelessness, right? Some rock bottom, like us alcoholics like to say. Well, you know what? I can stand up here and say I probably hit rock bottom about 100 times. I swore to God that I'd never drink again. That's a rock bottom. I swore to my wife I'd never drink again. I swore to my kids I'd never drink again. I swore to a lot of friends I'd never drink again. That way I could be invited to a wedding. Guess what? I get kicked out of that wedding half an hour later. I was hopeless. And then it says, we talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was the profound temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good nature, contempt of some church folk and their doings. His insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness of he spoke and these things just before he died. These reconciliations welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. So this is already God starting to convict Bill. And he doesn't even know it. He doesn't even know it. Do you know why he doesn't know it? Because in the next paragraph he starts questioning because his pride is sitting there telling him, maybe I don't need God to do this. It says, that wartime day at the old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, because I want to touch on that. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are. For that means blind faith in the strange proposition that the universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlying all. How could there be of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I would go. So Bill has this thought of God, and going back to what he's talking about the Winchester Cathedral came back to him during wartime. Me being the alcoholic I am, the only time I ever talked to God is when I needed something. Right? Now I have a God of mercy, grace, and love that I can rely on every day of my life. And not just go to him. And you can see that Bill's already questioning it. But what's amazing about this book, and we'll get to it here in a little bit, that where it says, in a spirit of the universe, guess what's capitalized? The title, Spirit of the Universe, capitalized title. Where it says, power greater than myself, capitalized title. And I'll get to it here in a little bit, but me being an alcoholic and me being full of self-pride and self-worth and self-justification and self-knowledge, I want to sit there and say, look, I can believe in whatever I want. But this book is notorious for tricking me to stay sober, and it's notorious for tricking me to find God. Yeah. And it's crazy how every time they sit there and they say, go ahead, believe in a power greater than yourself, they capitalize it as a title, just like the Son is capitalized, just like the Father is capitalized, referring to God. And I won't get into it because I'll get into an argument with people at AA that it's not. But anyway, neither here nor there. Stop getting myself into other. It says, with ministers and the world's religion, I parted right there. When they talked of God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated and mind snapped shut against such a theory. So even right there, I relate to Bill. I was born 53 years after Bill. And how can I relate to a guy that has the same problem I do, can't stop drinking even though we want to, know that death is around the corner, don't care, know that my marriage is being ruined, don't care. It's because pride is sitting right out those doors, doing push-ups, waiting for me. For me to sit there and think that I got this. For me to sit here and think that, hey, I don't need this anymore. I don't need to show up on a Monday. I don't need to show up on a Wednesday. I don't need to show up on a Sunday. Goes further. It says, to Christ, I conceded that certainty of a great man, not too closely followed, but by those who claimed him, his moral teachings most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seems convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. Oh, that's me. I just want to pick and choose what I like. I just want to pick and choose. I just want to stand up. I don't want to raise my hands. I don't want to come up to the altar because that doesn't do it for me. Well, guess what? That means my addiction is running rampant. That means that my addiction is in control. I may not even be drinking that day. I may not have drank for 6 months. But as soon as pride steps in and I start cherry picking what I like about this book and with this book especially, oh, my addiction is running rampant. The wars which had been fought, the burnings, and the religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religious of mankind had done any good, judging from what I had seen in Europe, and since the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he's seen the boss universe and was certainly had me. So now he's sitting there doubting God. He's sitting there saying, if there was a God, he would have saved me already. But guess what? The addiction the devil has a grasp on me, and he's given up. He's given up any thought of God. And it says, but my friend sat before me, and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will have failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. So now, Bill's friend sits there and says, this is what you need to do. God had done for him what he could not do for himself. And that's essentially all you need to do to squash that pride. That pride of sitting there being like, I can do this on my own. That pride of saying, I don't need to answer the phone when someone calls. That pride of saying, I don't need to give this away that was given so freely to me. So he goes on and continues to talk. And he goes, had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. How amazing is that? That basically is saying what the Bible says, that God gives to us freely. As long as we're willing to ask for it. As long as we're willing to ask for help. And then it says, that floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. My pride would have sat there and been like, I'm done reading this. I'm not going to give the religious people that credibility. Here was something at work in human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the table. He shouted great tidings. You know what's so crazy? Is Bill right there forgets all of his best friend's past. And he goes, there's a miracle sitting there. And he begins to slowly start to believe. I was the exact same way. I thought that I could run my life. I thought that I had everything figured out. I had a good paying job. I had a wife that hadn't left me yet, even though she probably should have a lot. I was growing a family. I moved to Roseville. I'm doing everything right. Well, guess what? We tried to have a kid for 1.5 years. I can't control that. So what do I try to do? I call a doctor. I go get tests. Hey, everything's normal. I don't know why you can't get pregnant, right? I didn't believe in miracles. I believe I made my own miracles before I got in this place. So I was just like Bill. I questioned every little thing along the way. I questioned every step I took, which for the addict, I believe is normal, because that's the only way I knew how to run my life, was by controlling it, by letting pride get in the way of everything I did. And then when something didn't work out, when that doctor said, hey, nothing's wrong, I had nowhere else to go. Nowhere else to go. And at that point, I didn't have God in my life. We'll get there in a little bit. Papa. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. So it was crazy. We talk so much about how the world is just crazy. It's going nuts, and we need to stay focused on God. And I'm a firm believer of that. But I saw hope today. I saw hope watching the first half of the Ravens game, and they talked about recovery. They talked about two players that suffered with addiction. Hallelujah! If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. The world is just that little glimpse of hope. Before this, while I was playing with my kid, I overheard two players helping each other out because they couldn't do it alone, even though they found God. And one of the players was quoted by saying, and it goes perfectly with this, he was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new well. They asked the player, they said, well, what did you change? He goes, everything. Everything. Who I hung out with, what I believed in, what I was doing. How crazy is that? There is hope out there. And we just need to be that conduit of hope. Sorry, that was a little sidetrack, but man, it just floored me. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestige of my old prejudice. Here we go. Pride's creeping into Bill. Pride's creeping in. The word God still aroused a certain empathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, capitalized, universal mind or spirit, capitalized, spirit or nature, capitalized, but I resisted the thought of a capitalized czar of the heavens, however loving his capitalized sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. That's awesome. That's great for me because that means that I'm not different. Because I got a problem, guess what? Other people feel the same way. Let's connect. Let's talk. Let's figure out what you changed in your routine, what you changed in your life so you have that glow. My friend suggested that then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Now, I'm going to be careful with that because this is saved and sober. And I am a firm believer that there is only one God. But however you get to that one God, you're going to get there. As long as you're working a program recovery, and I'll leave it at that. That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself, capitalized. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. Where do we see that in here? Where do we see it in here? All you have to do is believe and you will be saved. All you have to do is believe and you will be saved. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So now he starts gaining some traction. Thus I was convinced that, now he's saying the word, so it came to him. Thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. So what did we talk about? We talked about taking that first step through those doors. We talked about taking that first step, sitting in these pews, standing during worship, raising your hands, walking down the aisle, and coming to God. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst open to me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. So this whole time, it's all he needed. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. So all he had to do was ask, and God showed up. God showed up for him. But soon the sense of his presence had been bottled out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so it had been ever since, how blind I had been. So now he's convicted by God. Now he's starting to go through this shame, guilt, remorse train, not with drinking, but man, how foolish he was. letting the outside world convince him that God couldn't help him. Well, I'm standing here today telling you that God's the only thing that helped me. Everything I tried on my own, every ask of desperation on my own, that would just keep me from not drinking that next day, or from stopping at the bar, or for pulling up, or going to this place. Everything I did didn't work. And it's crazy how, as an alcoholic, I start beating myself up. But we'll get into that a little bit later. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremors. There I humbly offered myself to God. So what's awesome about this is if your pride tells you, hey, I don't want to cry in front of a bunch of people at the altar. Hey, I don't want to humble myself before God in front of 40 people, 100 people. Try what Bill did. It says, there I humbly offered myself in a hospital, as then I understood him, to do with me as he would. He's given himself to God. He's saying, God, please take the self-will out of me and let me do your will. I placed myself unreversely under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend, capital F, take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. So what did it take for the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous to be saved? God. Not himself, not doctors, not a clinic, not the self-knowledge, not pride. It took God. And I'm so thankful that I've read this book. I've read this book numerous times. Sober, not sober, in and out of benders. And I'm so thankful that God hit me with that today. Because it reminded me that I can't do this without him. It reminded me that my pride doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter what my boss thinks about me. It doesn't matter what my neighbor thinks about me. Because as Pastor alluded, they're not the final judge of me. God is. So it shouldn't matter whatsoever. But hey, I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict. I still care a little bit about what my peer thinks about me. I care about what the people in church think about me. I care about what my boss thinks about me. That's human nature. But what do I got to do? I have a cure. It's right here. It says I give my life over to God. Yeah. And it's funny how it goes from as you understand him to God, a 3-letter word. And that's what God touched me on this. And it's crazy how I sat there and I was going through the Bible and I was like, pride this, pride that. And let me tell you, the Bible does a very good job, as I've learned these last couple days, of basically saying that pride is the ultimate sin. It relates it to selfishness. And it just goes over and over. And this is what's crazy, and this is how I want to relate the Bible to, like I said, I need to humble myself. I don't know this like some others in this room, but what's awesome is I can learn and I can relate to something I do know about. And this is just at the very beginning, just like in Bill's story, the very beginning of this book. And I want to start here in Genesis 3, where it talks about, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, ye hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. So already, something's coming into this perfect marriage. And I want to go up the line before. It says, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. It's so crazy how when I'm living a godly life, I'll call it, when I'm following God, I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed of what I look like. I'm not ashamed of what I say. Pride isn't around. Pride is shut out of my brain for that split second. I'm not ashamed. But then guess what? The enemy gets in. The enemy just sits there and whispers. And even though just like Bill, even though he knew if he drank again that he was going to die, Adam and Eve knew if they were to eat from that tree, they were going to die. Thank God we serve a forgiving God. It says, and the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. So she knows. She knows, just like Bill did, just like I did, that if I have another drink, if I do something I'm not supposed to do, I'm going to die. But my addiction, my insanity that ran my life tells me it's okay. It's okay. Let me just walk with the devil for a little bit and find out how really okay it is. And the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, lowercase, knowing good and evil. Man, if someone told me if I could have a drink, I'd turn into a god, I'd probably have a drink. So I'm no different than Eve here. And then here we go to verse 6. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. Man, guys, I'm just going to talk to you here for a second. Have you ever not done something your wife didn't want you to do? What happens? Hell hath no wrath as a woman scorned. If I was Adam, I would have done the same thing. I said, okay, babe, yeah, all right, I'll have a bite too. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. That sounds a lot like my addiction. As soon as I have that first drink, what do I want to do? I want to hide. I don't want anyone to talk to me. I don't want anyone to know that I have a problem. I don't want anyone to know that I backslid. I don't want anyone to know that I relapsed. So I'm not going to say anything. That's what my pride tells me. It says, and they heard the voice of the Lord, God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord called unto Adam and said unto him, where art thou? Man, you got to do something bad if you're hiding from God. You got to do something bad if your sponsor texts you and say, hey, how you doing? And you don't text him back. You're probably doing something bad if pastor's texting you and you don't text him back. Amen. I know the feeling, believe me. But what's amazing about that is that I'm no different than a person 53 years ago. And I'm no different than a person thousands of years ago. I've sinned. I've sinned. So what do I got to do? I got to do work. I got to do work to keep that pride at bay. Because that enemy is sitting out there doing push-ups, waiting for me, getting bigger. So what do I need to do? I need to work a program of recovery. Whether I think I'm an addict or not. Let me tell you, I thought this book was just a load of garbage until I actually started working it. I thought if I touched this book, it'd go up in flames. Praise God, it hasn't. That'd be a whole different thing. But that was all my pride. That was all the enemy saying, Anthony, you're not good enough. Anthony, you don't deserve a miracle in your life. So let's go back to that miracle. I stood up in here in December, and I've said this before, but I know some of you haven't heard it. Like I said, I didn't read the Bible. I didn't know anything about God. All I knew is he was supposedly this person that created everything. I didn't know anything about forgiveness. I didn't know anything about love. because I didn't have the capacity to love. My pride would not let me love another human being. So I don't know why my wife stayed with me. I don't know why AC looked at me and smiled, because I didn't have the capacity to love. But God knew that one day I'd be standing up here as a testimony for somebody saying that, hey, look, even though that you may think that you are nothing, even though that your pride is sitting there telling you that you can do it on your own, there's a miracle waiting to happen if you just wait for it. And I was blessed I got that miracle. How I talked about, I thought I could do everything on my own. Not to get too deep into it. I think it's only reserved for my sponsor and a few other men. But, I thought I was the master of making babies. Let's be real. So now I have a doctor telling me that you can't have a kid. I said, Doc, let's be real here, man. I mean, what do I need to do? Twice a day, 5 times a day? Like, what's the deal? Right? You know what I needed to do? I needed to come up here. I needed to come to the altar. I needed to ask God to bless my wife with a child. That was December. That was the end of December. February, 3 months later, my wife is pregnant. That's amazing. And I won't even go into the miracle of baby Riley coming 7 weeks early and me giving it up to God. If you guys want to talk about that, we'll talk after, because I'm here to talk about pride. Oh, man. So I do want to touch on what the Bible does say about pride, because I think it is very, very powerful. It says, the pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home on the heights, you who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Oh, that's how I was. Oh, that's how I live my life. I said, good luck chopping me down. I got more money than you. I drive a nice car than you, and I got a bigger house than you do. And I am way better than you. Thank God I'm not like that anymore. Thank God I came up to this altar. Thank God I asked God for forgiveness. Thank God that I said sorry. Thank God I took the first steps through that door. Thank God I surrender to Him every day. But let me tell you, that song that they were singing, man, I got a little conviction. I'm like, man, do I worship God all the time, 24/7? Do I have Him as a part of my life all the time? It's real easy when I wake up, I listen to worship music, do a little bit of prayer, talk to God. But man, as soon as that phone rings, as soon as the world comes in, I start spinning. So man, that was a good reminder that I need to have God in my life 24/7, not just in the morning, not just when I'm feeling good. I sure as heck need Him when I'm not feeling good. Let me tell you. And then it says, so pride can deceive us. It says, when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was disposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. So basically that's saying, guess what? God doesn't like prideful people. And He will strip you of that pride real quick. So then it says, Proverbs 11:2, says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. So I would suggest that we humble ourselves, or God will have to do it for us. And as I wrote before, it says, humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time He may exalt you. That doesn't mean that I raise my hands, I walk up here, and all of a sudden I'm exalted and I'm free. It says right there, at the proper time. It's all in God's time. It's not in my time. If it's in my time, then pride's already in the way. And how can God work? How can God work? And so, it's about 8:30. I'm going to wrap it up with this. I've had a few people come up and say, oh, here, I'm going to back up. I'm going to do this full circle. Sorry if this takes an extra 15 minutes, guys, but it's going to be good. I hope. So, what's amazing about what I learned through all this was, yes, God really dislikes prideful people. It sits there and it says, God opposes the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. Well, I sit there and I ask myself, I said, how do I become humble? What do I got to do to become humble? Well, that's another word I got to look up because the addict I am, I had no idea what humility is. No idea what being humble is, right? And, to be honest, the best definition of humility is the willingness to ask for help. Whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a pastor. Let me give you a recommendation. Let's start with God. Ask God for help first, and then go to other people. It says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So what do I got to do? How do I humble myself? Well, here, let me help some of you guys with the steps that I took to even understand what humility was. It was walking through that door. It was admitting I had a problem. It was sitting there putting my pride to the side, getting rid of it, and being like, you know what? I can't do this by myself anymore. Point me in the right direction. Show me where I need to go. It's walking down the aisle. It's sitting in a pew. It's standing up. It's being open and willing to doing things that I'm not comfortable doing. I'm not comfortable standing in front of a group of people, especially other men, because my pride tells me that I can't, and cry. But let me tell you, I am a firm believer now that every tear you cry in this house at that altar is breaking down the wall between you and God. So if you're not crying your eyes out, you're not doing it right. At least that's my experience. At least that's my experience. So what do I got to do? I got to come up here. I say, God, you got it all, right? You're right here. I come up here. I say, God, I don't know what to do. Just help me out. I'm sorry. I'm repenting of my sins. I am sorry. I'm giving everything to you. Every last drop. Not half of it. Every last drop. Because let me tell you a secret. What I've learned, God already knows everything. He just convicts me and reminds me, so I have to say it to myself. And God goes, now you're empty? In the proper timing, like it says. He goes, guess what? Guess what? I'm going to bless you. And I'm going to fill you up. And I'm going to fill you up until, okay, now you're full. Now what do? Well, maybe I backslid. Maybe I think I got this. Maybe I let pride slip in. What do I got to do? Go back to the altar. Say, God, you know what I did. God, I am sorry. I emptied myself out again for you. God says, I love you. I got you, Anthony. I got you. Hey, I love you. I'm giving it all right back to you. And then what God does is he goes, Anthony, now that you think you figured this out, instead of letting pride creep in, I want you to come back to me empty again. How do I do that, God? How do I come back to you empty if you've given me everything? He says, go give it away. He says, here, take the blessing. Come back to me with an empty cup. Stand at that altar. Say thank you for what I've done for my brother. And I'm going to fill you back up again. And that is the blessing of Jesus Christ. It's just sink water. It's okay. It won't kill you. Sink water is healthier than most of the stuff that comes out of your fridge, but we won't get into that. So it says right there, I hope I did justice by teaching you guys about pride through my experience, strength, and hope, because I struggled with it. I struggled with pride more than I struggled with alcohol, but I just didn't know it. I didn't know what character defects I did until I got into work, until I saw the similarities, not the differences, until I opened the Bible, the basic instructions before leaving earth, and how they correlate, and how I can relate to that I'm fallen, and how that I can relate to that there's not one righteous person on this entire earth, as it says in Romans, I believe. Sure? Sounds good. I got to get a little bit of Bible knowledge in there. And I am not different, I'm not better than, and I'm not less than. All I strive to is keep my pride at bay and be better than I was yesterday. Thank you guys for letting me talk, and Pastor, it's been amazing.